Well, so everyone, welcome to our second colloquium of the term. We have Dr. Sherman here talking about the recent content analysis that she's been working on, and so welcome.
Thank you. If I say something interesting later, then you can back if you wish.
That was non-contingent.
That was non-contingent topic, which of course I appreciate. Thanks everybody for coming out on this rainy day to listen to my talk, and thanks to our potential future listeners. So this is being videotaped, not you, just me. So just avoid the camera if you're camera shy. That's just so that School of Psych Science can have a record of at least some of our talks. So you might wonder, I'm not saying that you have to, but you might wonder why a psychologist is interested in Halloween costumes. It's not necessarily intuitively clear what that idea, costuming, Halloween, holiday, would have to do with psychology. But I can tell you, and it has to do with pictures, a little something like these. I'm just going to let these sink in here for a second. Just like get the proverbial eyeful, and I do use that phrase deliberately. So some of you a year and a half ago or so might remember that this little number created a stir. Some of you know what the title of this costume is? Christian, you're thinking.
Sexy PhD costume, wasn't it?
Sexy PhD. Created by a company called Darling. No problem. I'm glad you're here. So this is the Darling Sexy PhD costume.
What's she got in her hand?
A diploma.
Oh,
Dr. Watkins. That is, of course, a diploma.
something sharp.
And, everything about this PhD robe is wrong. From the mortarboard to the lack of pants or something, covering the most of the bottom half of her body. Sparked some discussion. This costume is actually still available on Amazon, and as of this morning there were 440 comments, most of them utterly hilarious about this costume. In the middle we have, I don't know if you can see this detail on the pocket of this pseudo lab coat, that reads Sexy Scientist. These two costumes together sparked a Twitter fest, hashtag what I wear to work, because this room is full of students and PhD level scientists, if you will, and pretty sure that's not what any of us have ever worn to work. And then maybe my most favorite of all is our twinsies Ghostbusters costume. You might or might not be as excited as I am about the remake of the Ghostbusters movie coming out fairly soon with an all-women cast. This is not apparently going to be their set of outfits. So, I see these things, like you do, come across Twitter. I mean, I'm not actually on Twitter, although maybe I should be, but Facebook or news sites, whatever. I see these things come across, and I wonder about them, because that's what scientists do, right? We wonder, what is that? What is this? What are we doing? What are we saying? Now, right here at the outset, I want to be clear that I know that costumes are not about what we wear to work, right? Of course not. That's why it's a costume. Unless we're actors, in which case we might wear something like this for some directorial reason. Most of us know that we're not wearing Halloween costumes to work for a reason. The occasions are different, the expectations are different, the whole setup, right, is of course different, and there's certainly something to be said for, I don't care, whatever, let loose, be something you're not usually for Halloween, be something different, try on a new persona, whether that's raunchy or sexy or strong or weak or, whatever, right? That's the point of a holiday that's all about fantasy and trying on different personas or different ideas. However, these costumes and others like them are not occurring in a cultural vacuum. These did not just spring up out of nowhere. And when we have certain groups of people, in this case I'll talk about women, but we could apply similar arguments to pretty much any group of color, any group of people who have experienced a variety of disadvantages, when we think about the path that women have had to take to earn our PhDs and hold that highly unrealistic little diploma, it's pretty interesting to that and have that accomplishment recast as something that's really only about visual sexual appeal. For example, Christine Ladd Franklin completed all the requirements for her psychology PhD at Johns Hopkins in 1882. And she wasn't awarded the degree until 1926. Early theories about causes of illness subscribed to the wandering womb theory, suggesting that organs were in fact not attached to anything and that they variously wandered about the body, because there's so much room in there, right, that especially uteruses were not fixed, and that they would wander at will. And when calls in U.S. and European Society for Women's Suffrage, for women's education, particularly egalitarian higher education, reached a noticeable pitch, a supposition was floated that too much education would cause more of this wandering womb, that women would be therefore unsuitable for marriage, unable to have children, would be sterile, and would be, in essence, education would in fact be threatening to the very existence of appropriate womanhood. Right now, on Party City, there is a boys' costumes page and a girls' costumes page, and front and center on the boys' costumes page is career costumes. Noticeably absent is any mention of career costumes on the girls' page, but girls get storybook costumes. Little Bo Peep, Little Red Riding Hood, variety of costumes associated with nursery rhymes and fairy tales. So that, in a sort of large nutshell, if you will, is why I as a psychologist am interested in what's going on with these costumes. Because one of the questions is really, okay, so these are eye-catching, among several other things, but are there a lot of them? Do they add up too much? Is this a flash in the pan? Is this a small portion of what girls or women or boys and men see, or parents of any sex or gender see when they go to look for a costume for a party or for their kid, or right? What's the overall kind of sense of conclusion we can draw, right? These are obviously cherry-picked examples to start off a talk, to draw people's interest. So as a scientist, what is a method that we could use that would move us away from cherry-picking to say, what's the kind of whole story? So that's what my talk is going to focus on today. I'm going to use data from two projects, one that looks more at sexualization in Halloween costumes and one that looks at gender stereotypes in Halloween costumes. And before I get to some data, I want to give you a little more background on why I think this topic is important. We know from a variety of both cross-sectional and longitudinal work that sexist ideologies such as adherence to hostile or benevolent sexism are linked to broad patterns of social inequality, by which I mean women's political representation, women's educational achievement, payment for work, violence experienced at the broad cultural level. So the individual, the personal, really is political, to echo a 1970s now outdated feminist rallying cry, but it actually appears to be pretty true. The more sexist individuals report in any given society, the more overall sexist that society is, taking broad measures of gender inequality. In addition, adherence to sexist ideologies like hostile and benevolent sexism is based on acceptance, understanding, knowledge of gender stereotypes, right? They're linked by definition. For example, the definition of benevolent sexism rests on our acceptance of girls and women as weak and passive and in need of protection. Those things are intertwined in ways that are not really separable. We also know that gender stereotypes are learned. Babies do not appear to know about gender stereotypes. Of course, it's always difficult to be really clear about what babies actually know, but it does when we get to slightly more reliable ages, 2 and 3 and 4. We know that knowledge about gender emerges over time. It becomes more complex over time. Adherence to stereotypes rises and falls and rises a little bit again in adolescence. So we know that there's some environmental input into the understanding of stereotypes. So if we look at how much exposure there is at any given time for any given group or culture to ideas about gendered stereotypes, then we have a pathway to maybe, right, work our way back up to this idea of broad social inequality. And since most, not all, but most cultures on the planet today at least pay some lip service to the idea of gender equality, maybe not every other part of equality, but most cultures say, yeah, we probably sort of should at least be thinking about talking about equality between men and women. This might be a way that we could potentially impact those multiple levels. Now, this talk is not going to do that. Right, that's going to be, a 50-person lab for about the next, century that might actually map all that out. But I'll take a small piece of that today. It's also important, I think, because there are consequences to our acceptance of gender stereotypes. One of the biggest consequences of our acceptance of gender stereotypes is inaccuracy in dealing with other people. If I assume that Dr. Beneri is stoic and strong at every moment of every day, I'm going to miss those times when he is scared or sad or in need of some support. Now, I know that Dr. Beneri is stoic and strong every minute of every day, and so he never is in need of any help. But I could miss a chance to be a friend or a colleague because of my assumption about gender stereotypes. And there are millions of other examples. I won't pick on anyone else. I just picked on Dr. Beneri because I know that he is in fact strong and stoic and can totally take it. So we could be inaccurate. We can also normalize ideas that are by their very definition limiting, detrimental, putting people in really, really small boxes. Certainly we know that through illusory correlation and confirmation bias, we build up ideas about stereotypes that then help us interpret the world. According to them, they actually form structures in our brain, cognitive schemas, and that can lead to both confirmation and reinforcement of stereotypes, as well as, again, more inaccuracy. There's some pressure to conform to stereotypes that may, in fact, actually be quite unhealthy. We have determined that the folks who are most masculine, hyper-masculine, or most feminine are actually the folks who are least psychologically, and in some studies, least physically healthy as well, particularly for hypermasculinity. Those folks are taking incredible risks in the service of adherence to extreme hypermasculine ideals of risk-taking, stoicism, never asking for help. That can be quite detrimental to their psychological and physical health. And then again, through processes of especially confirmation bias, stereotypes are fundamentally reinforcing and self-perpetuating. We know from a wide variety of work that lots of stereotypes break down into two orthogonal characteristics of warmth and competence. That's been very, very true for gender for about the last probably 100 years, in a variety of studies that have looked at the content of gender stereotypes. But these ideas of warmth and competence have been applied in skin color, race studies, age studies, disability studies. A variety of ways that people have looked at stereotypes have said you can range from cold to warm, and you can range from competent to incompetent. In terms of gender, most folks in a stereotypical fashion characterize women as more warm than men, but less competent than men, and the opposite then is true for characterization of men. And we know that this warmth versus competence ideal actually has very old roots. Occasionally I tell undergraduates that sexism is actually an extremely stale set of thoughts. It is in fact, quite old, working on 2 centuries old at this point in time. A variety of historical work has looked at the idea of the doctrine of 2 spheres, which arose after the Industrial Revolution in the very early United States and especially in Europe. During the pre-Industrial Revolution agrarian societies, men and women, if they were heterosexual, and most people were assumed to be heterosexual, were in heterosexual marriages that were teams. You were clearing land and raising livestock and making clothing and feeding your family on what you could do as a team on the land. And your team included not just you and your partner, but also, 12 kids, because that was what was required. Because A, lots of those kids were gonna die on childbirth or in the first 2 years, and that farm life, that agrarian life, required lots and lots and lots of hands on deck. With the advent of the Industrial Revolution, a variety of social upheavals and revolutions took place. I wish this could be a history talk, but I'll save that for Melinda in my second gender class, but not today. We've done some of this actually already. What happened was that a variety of social structures got redefined, and gender was among them as an organizing part of social structures. And that gave rise to the idea that men and women are not just complementary and have different skill sets, but they're actually complete and polar opposites. And if you've seen any advertising in the United States ever, but especially in the last 10 years, the idea that men and women are complete and polar opposites will not be at all surprising to you. It's unavoidable, actually. It is such a common advertising thread that you might not even notice it anymore, because it is just sheer, you just cannot get away from it. Once we had adopted and incorporated into thought and practice and education and home life the idea that men and women operated in non-overlapping domains, that led to a redefinition of what was masculine and what was feminine. And those things were, again, conceived as, and continue in large part to be conceived as, polar opposites. So the definition of pure, total womanhood at the time included things like being morally pure, that is not sexy, pious, submissive, emotional. In contrast, masculinity was defined as rational, not emotional, intellectual, dominant, protective, also boorish or coarse. So you can notice that these definitions include both negative and positive attributes of both masculinity and femininity. Nobody emerges from these definitions kind of unscathed, right? There are disadvantages and advantages to both of them, but what is clear is that these were widely adopted and have continued to be extremely influential. In fact, we can see vestiges of them, sometimes outright just moved forward in time pretty unchanged, in what the content of current traditional and modern stereotypes are. So when I say traditional, I'm talking like 1940 to 1980, and then modern, I'm talking about since the mid to late 80s to now. And the way we find this stuff out, the content of stereotypes out, is that we give your standard undergraduate sample a bunch of adjectives, and we say rate these adjectives on some scale of masculinity to femininity, all the way to masculinity, all the way to femininity. How much are men and women described by these variety of adjectives? I've listed just a few of the most common up here in the traditional column. Men are strong, women are weak, men are violent, women are kind, men are the winners, women are the prizes. Those ideas have been standard issue sort of gender stereotypes since at least the 60s in the United States. Very reliable, very consistent findings, lots of universities. Very little age variation in participants though, so you're right, we should always keep in mind that this is what undergraduates say their idea of gender stereotypes consist of. What we've seen since the sexual and feminist revolutions of the 60s and 70s is that in particular parents of daughters are saying, hey, by the way, I don't really like that all these strong, powerful things get assigned only for my neighbor's son, because actually my daughter is pretty smart and she's pretty active and she's pretty strong, and so why can't those things be part of our definition of femininity? Now, no one's actually saying that literal sentence out loud, right? I mean, I am, but right, Gabby is. But in terms of a cultural conversation, really what's happening is that assignment of attributes is moving a little bit, and things that formerly had been really very separate, this stuff is just for boys and men, and this stuff is just for girls and women, conceptualizations of femininity are starting to include things that formerly had been assigned to just masculinity. Interesting change. Two things are interesting. Men are not taking on anything feminine. That is not considered a valuable skill set or set of behaviors or attributes. Not at all. This is a one-way assumption of masculine behaviors to feminine people. And the culture or parents or people themselves or however this absorption process happens is not fully letting go of traditional feminine stereotypes either. So women are supposed to now be intellectual and do all of the emotional work, particularly in heterosexual relationships, for example. Women are supposed to work 60 hours a week and do most of the domestic child care and domestic chores at home. I know that there are lots of exceptions. There are multiple exceptions to those rules in this very room. But when we look at broad patterns of who does what in the US culture right now, we're seeing still a very, very feminized second shift, even as women strive to higher and higher levels of achievement than ever before, at least certainly compared to 1800s and early 1900s. What you also see is an incredible emphasis on sex and sexiness, on this more modern conceptualization of femininity. And that's a really interesting kind of change. It's going to be illustrated here. Here are some more pictures because you're getting tired of me talking. So here's some pictures. I did a quick search on Darth Vader costumes this morning. And about eyeballing it, to be clear, about 99% of the costumes that come up when you do a Darth Vader costume search look like the one on your left. Now, we have absolutely no idea what the genitalia of the body is that is inhabiting that costume, but Darth Vader is a male character. Maybe that's a man in there, right? We have no idea, but that's Darth Vader. About 1 or 2%, though, of hits returned on that search for Darth Vader look like the one on our right. It's not outright called the women's Darth Vader costume in the ones that I saw, though I have seen other examples where they do outright call a costume like this the women's Spider-Man or Spider costume. But this one was titled the sexy Darth Vader costume, because that's definitely what I think when I think of, the worst villain in the known universe is that she should be sexy. I don't know if you're seeing what I'm seeing about how this person is holding that weapon. I don't know. I'll just leave that to your imagination. Here's another contrast. The whole idea of Spider-Man is that the costume conceals his identity. Not really working. First of all, there's the you're right. But right? These are not equivalent costumes. We are not seeing, right, that kids should just be superheroes, either in a variety of forms, or that girls get to be superheroes in the same way that boys get to be superheroes. Girls have to be superheroes or villains or whatever in a very particular way. And that way has a lot to do with appearance focus. And that should not actually surprise us. It doesn't surprise me. I don't know if it surprises you, but if it surprises you, it really should not. Because, here I am again. I should have been a history professor, I swear. But here we go. We have to have some history. There is a tremendous amount of focus on women's appearance to the exclusion of lots of other behaviors or attributes of a feminine persona. It's maybe started with an extremely long-standing, going all the way back to who, Melinda? Aristotle. Don't talk. You're eating Aristotle, who started the idea that women were dumb and men were brilliant, and we just keep re-upping on that idea, despite the collective feminine brain powers collected in this room. Women were also excluded from athletic training and athletic participation until I was 4. So within my lifetime, within several people's lifetime in this room. Until 1970, in some cases in the mid-80s, women blocked from having mortgages in our own name, having credit cards in our own name, having rights to money earned by ourselves, access to higher education, access to a variety of employment avenues. When you lack access to full citizen participation in a society, you are fully dependent. Oh gosh, look at that. Independent versus dependent, right? Didn't we talk about that as one of the content of gender stereotypes? When women, through a variety of structural, legal barriers, as well as just expectancy barriers, are prevented from being fully financially, politically, educationally independent, what's left? Well, for centuries, the only thing that has been left has been heterosexual marriage, because the guy got to earn the money, so if you needed resources, and who among us does not need resources, then you better figure out how to get married. And what do you need to get married? Well, if your husband doesn't care whether you're athletic, or smart, or educated, or earn money, then pretty much all you have to go on is your looks. And look, I mean, there's a reason that I'm not dressed in ripped jeans and a tank top today, right? It's not professional, right? Right, I'm not saying that women shouldn't have to care about our appearance, right? We all want to look good in a variety of settings. I'm not saying we have to go around in sackcloth and ashes, but look at how we got here. And let's look at whether the appearance focus is egalitarian or not. And in fact, it's not. It's quite focused on women's appearances rather than men's appearances. And I knew this was true for a long, long time. And then, of course, I had a kid, and she's smart, and various observations happened over the years. And about, 3 or 4 years ago, my family was in Portland. We were waiting for a meal. My daughter was, 5 or 6. And she backs up and she says, "Mom, I have noticed something." And I have learned something about my daughter, Iris, when she says, "Mama, I have noticed something. You really should pay attention, because about what's going to happen next is usually something quite intriguing." So she said, "Mama, I am looking around at the pairs in this room." And of course, by pairs, she meant couples. She meant male-female couples. She was 5, right? I mean, the linguistic development was not as much as it would be now since she's 12. "I've noticed something about these pairs in this restaurant." She says, "Mama, the women are very beautiful. They are dressed up, their hair is smooth and shiny, and they have a lot of stuff on their face." What is that stuff on their face, Mama? Because, I don't have the stuff on my face. That's just not what I do at my house. So she doesn't know. And I said, "Okay, yeah, so it's makeup, right? We have a little discussion about definitions of various things, stuff you can put on your face if you wish." And I said, "Okay, so that's what the women look like. What else did you want to tell me?" And she said, "Well, Mama, the men look..." And she got this little, look on her face. And I said, "It's okay, whatever you want to say, we'll work it out. Just say what you want to say." She said, "Well, I don't want to say that they're ugly. ... But ... they don't look very nice either." Right? And I took a look around, right? And the women are dressed up for a date, right? Their hair was shiny, and their clothes were pressed and clean, and in a number of cases showing a lot of cleavage, and they were made up, and they had a certain look. And the guys, no offense to the guys in this room, really, but the guys had not made that level of effort. They were fine, right? But they had definitely not made that level of effort. Now, the guys in this room probably would never show up for a date with anybody on anywhere on the gender spectrum without, really putting thought and care in it. But for whatever reason, the guys at this restaurant at that time had not. And all I'm trying to say is that's an example of actually what we see outside this room, right? All present company accepted. And here's what happens when we have this overwhelming emphasis on appearance. One of the things it does is play up and reify and reinforce the idea of extreme differences between men and women. So women tend to wear their nails long with lots of sparkly varnish or fake nails or rhinestones, or as should I tell the story? Yes, I will. As I discovered on my trip to Orlando in November, when you go to Disney, women get their manicures done with little Mickey Mouses on them. Which, cute, fine, lovely. But not a single male person that I assume to be male had the little Mickey Mouse on his nails. Long hair versus short hair, hair with a lot of product or time-consuming styling, dress, how much skin do we show, how practical, comfortable, tight, safe is the dress. Keeping up the appearance that is currently judged to be acceptable for women versus men takes a lot of time, costs a lot of money that might otherwise be spent on other things. And I don't care how people spend their money. It's perfectly fine to spend it on things that enhance one's appearance on an individual level. That's perfectly, totally appropriate. But I'm talking about broad social patterns, right, where only 1/2 of the human population is expected to spend that extra time and that extra money and take that time out of the things that they might otherwise be interested in doing. Education, sleeping, whatever, a variety of other human activities. At least to some degree, a heavy appearance on focus can restrict physical movement. Some very interesting work shows that when you prime half your randomly assigned group of women with ideas about femininity and appearance, their speed and accuracy of throwing a ball is significantly less than women not primed with ideas about their appearance. Variety of cognitive implications, increases in body shame, less ability to calculate math problems, a variety of intellectual concerns related to this appearance focus on appearance. And then as the American Psychological Association Task Force on the Sexualization of Girls and Women pointed out, what we have here is not just a trend of focus on appearance, but a heavy focus on a very sexualized appearance. So it's not just that Darth Vader was a little bit different from that female Darth Vader was a little bit different from that male Darth Vader. She was different in some very particular specific ways having to do with high heels, glimpse of thigh skin through her sheer tights, cleavage, right, and a variety of other very sexualized aspects of her body. I'm just going to point out that there is no blue version, I'm too handsome to read Shakespeare, of this magnet. That I have never ever found that. Variety of consequences of appearance focus, body dissatisfaction, decrease in egalitarian gender role beliefs, a decrease in sexual assertiveness for both college-age men and college-age women. Things like discussion of contraception, who's going to pass sexual history, useful, important information that you might want to have if you're going to have sex with somebody. Less ability to do that when both men and women were primed to think about objectification, to think about sexualization of their own bodies. And then finally, judgments of female figures, dolls, or pictures are quite harsh. People feel that sexualized, objectified female images are immoral, loose, not very smart, not very competent, not very athletic, and overall lacking in self-respect. So some consequences of this appearance focus, especially as it pushes further and further and further into being basically sexy or nothing. I am trying to be super conscious of the time, so I want to move to a little bit of a discussion of how we know that stereotypes get absorbed. Most of us, I think, are psychologists. We understand the process of reinforcement and punishment. There are a variety of just standard parenting lines that you're probably aware of. Big boys don't cry, boys don't play with dolls, that suggest that there are a variety of patterns of reinforcement and punishment for genders consistent compared to gender inconsistent behavior. And of course, there's been a tremendous amount of interest in modeling of gender consistent versus inconsistent behavior. This is another area of my talk where I could spend an entire hour talk on just the past history on modeling. I will do some of that with you this afternoon, Melinda, so this part will be continued in class if everyone else wants to come with me. Videos, audio materials, advertising. Ben, again, has talked about the incorporation of all this gender-related material into cognitive structures that help us organize that information, understand the world, and then continue to interpret information using that gendered lens. My project fits in here into this idea of advertising, or these two projects. So what I wanted to do when I took these first steps about a year and a half ago was think about Halloween. It's a pretty big deal. Right now, spending on Halloween is second only to Christmas in the United States. On average, people in the United States spend over $300 on costumes alone every year. I know, that's my face too, Kathy. In case you can't see Dr. Becker, please, this is her face. I know, right? Well, here's the thing. Your students have told you, have they not, that particularly when Halloween falls over a longish weekend, you have a Thursday night costume, a Friday night costume, right, Haley? A Saturday night costume, right? And there is tremendous pressure to not appear at different parties in the same costume. Now, not everybody does that, right? So Alyssa's face is there like, I've never done that, never will. Great, fantastic. I'm just telling you that some students tell me there's a fair amount of pressure to not appear in the same costume twice. Halloween costumes are widely available. They're now, in fact, available year-round. Hello, Internet. Right? That was never true, right? In the olden days, 15 years ago, you got the Halloween catalog in September, and if you wasted any time, your costume of choice was sold out, and that was it. And then you were like, Mom, make me a costume, or else you made yourself, or a variety of homegrown activities. What we have now is really cheap costumes, and not a lot of time with a lot of dual career earners at home, not a lot of time to make costumes, variety of social pressures that have moved us toward being much more likely to buy a ready-made costume, especially when you can just call it Amazon or Party City or whatever and have it delivered free of charge with Amazon Prime. I'm not shilling for Amazon, even though it sounds like it, in a couple of days. Huge age range. You can get not only costumes for your baby. I don't know when the last time was that any of you, if ever, have tried to put a Halloween costume on a baby, but I tried it once. And the banshee screaming that emanated from my daughter meant that thing was taken off too sweet. But you can buy hundreds of different options of baby costumes for your baby, and they are extremely adorable. Go, of course, all the way up to adulthood. You can, of course, buy costumes for your animals, your dogs and your cats, and I don't know, maybe even your parakeets. I have not investigated bird costumes, but I pretty much, it's the internet, anything's possible. And so my two main kind of research questions, are we experiencing, in what is available, are we moving toward this traditional idea of Halloween as try anything, try on something new, think broadly, or are we seeing more repetition of sort of standard gender stereotypes, either in appearance focus or in some other way? Content analysis has not been my standard process, but I learned a lot doing this project, and so I thought I'd share at least a little bit about what I learned, just in terms of the process. Selection of the things to be analyzed is, of course, of paramount importance. How do you make that decision? And there are several different ways that people do that. A variety of prior studies have looked at popularity or top seller status. And when you're talking about, the top 10 songs, the top 10 hits, or, the 50 highest grossing movies, that makes a certain amount of sense. But what does it mean when a costume retailer says, sorted by popularity? Well, I have no idea. Maybe it actually means they have some reliable data on which costumes are selling the fastest. But do we know? We don't know. So to me, it didn't make a whole lot of sense to use the information about popularity or top selling because it came from retailers themselves. Rather than being independently verified, it was really, I thought, just part of the ad. In addition, because my question was not just what are the most extreme costumes, but what is the whole picture of costumes, it seemed to me to make the most sense to look at everything, or a group of everything, of most of everything, and take a random sample. Because if you take a random sample, then you know that you have a sample that generalizes back to the rest, right, to the rest of the group, and you can answer some different questions that you might not be able to answer if you just looked at popularity data. So that's what we did. I also started with a coding framework. I did not allow that to develop through coding. That idea of developing a coding framework through content analysis is time-honored and it can be useful, but that's generally more useful when you have no idea what to expect. We know what the content of gender stereotypes is. We know what sexualization looks like. So it made much more sense to me to be very conservative, to be very careful, and to specify at the outset exactly what was going to count as a hit. Something that was going to be, yes, this is a gender stereotype, this is not a gender stereotype, yes, this counts as some kind of sexualization aspect, this kind of thing does not count. So we actually started top down and said, this is going to count, this isn't going to count, these are the things that we're looking for. And we pretty much kept to that. There were a few modifications that we had to make because something surprised us or because something wasn't there or was there that we didn't expect. But that was actually really, 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 really minor. I'll talk a little bit about training of coders, and I'll talk a little bit about reliability. So this is an argument to be made about validity, right? If I started, and I'll show you what my framework looks like in a little bit so you can see if you think it's valid. And this is, can people use this, we hope, valid coding framework consistently over time? And both of those things are really, really, really crucial because we don't have random assignment, we don't have longitudinal data, you know, in some of the standard other kinds of designs. All we have is it a valid framework, and did the people generating the codes do that appropriately? So it's really important that both of these things be as rigorous and accurate as possible. And so that meant that we chose Krippendorf's alpha as our measure of inter-rater reliability instead of some of the other more long-standing inter-rater reliability statistics that are out there. There's a really good piece by Hayes that's, that clock has to be wrong, right? That gives multiple reasons why K alpha is really the best choice that we have on the market right now. If you're interested, I can show you that. The biggest thing we had to do at the beginning was make sure that we were coding gender of the model accurately and consistently, right? Because that everything else falls from that. If we're going to compare male and female models, we have to be sure that we're coding male and female models accurately. Now, that alpha is really high. It's 0.96, well far and above any expectations that Krippendorf or Hayes or anybody else has for that reliability. But it's not at 0.1, which you might think is, well, why not? I mean, all you have to do is tell whether it's a boy or a girl. Sure. So here's one of our favorites, our little toddler penguin costume. Can you tell? Because we could not tell, right? There was no specification. It was just in the category toddler, no specification of gender. This face, I mean, you know, sweet toddler, round little baby face, pretty darn gender neutral. You can't see hands, you can't see feet, you can't, right, they're, right? So we had to
photoshopped in? I don't think that toddler's actually in there.
Lots of them are shopped in. I mean, that's it. Yes. I am quite certain. I am quite certain, right, Haley, that multitudes of these costumes have faces that are shopped in. Absolutely.
Okay.
Which, you know, I can't do anything about that, you know, right? That's right, that's the thing. But the point here is that we had to code this as gender unknown or gender neutral because there were really no clues about gender. Similar to this one, the only clue that we had that this was directed at male people was the fact that it was actually found in a boys' costume section. And then maybe kind of sort of, if you look at the shoes, which don't show in a whole lot of detail here, plus of course the problem with the computers, these shoes are more consistent with shoes in pictures that are more reliably labeled male costumes. So we did kind of reluctantly, I think, put costumes like this that had that additional text specification in the male group, but again, we had no, just like that Darth Vader one, we have no idea who's actually wearing these costumes. But that's actually not the really important part. What we want to know is what the retailers think should happen. Who should be wearing these costumes in terms of direction or direction of the advertising. So we chose this random sample that gave us, over 2 months, gave us 14,460 costumes. I'm not going to go into this because we're running really low on time and I haven't shown you any data at all yet. But this was a way of protecting against algorithms that would have limited our searches in some particular ways. And that resulted in 981 costumes coded for the sexualization project and just over 1,000. The difference there is because some costumes had multiple models, and for the gender project, those multiple models were coded, and for the sexualization project, only one of those was coded. 2 teams, 4 coders each. You'll see who they are at the very end. One of the things that we really wanted to do was protect against having coders who knew too much about the hypotheses, right? Because if you have coders who know what they're looking for, they're incredibly wide open to confirmation bias and content analysis. The biggest threat to validity of content analysis is confirmation bias, right? I think I know what's going to happen. I see what's going to happen. I exclude things that are not consistent with my hypotheses. So we tried to protect ourselves against that possibility a couple of different ways. Each team had 2 research assistants who were entirely naive to hypotheses. In most cases, one of those RAs was also pretty naive to the whole study of psychology of gender or gender concepts or terminology altogether. That actually created some difficulties in getting reliability. But because reliability was actually so difficult, I actually think that our coding is better because we really had to discuss things. We really had to hash things out. And when there was a question, I always ruled in favor of conservatism. I always said, well, if we code it this way, we're coding against our hypotheses. So let's resolve any discussion with taking the most conservative approach. We tested multiple types for inter-rater reliability. I'm going to show you what those numbers are in just a little bit, but it was an extremely long process. Coding framework for the sexualization project, based heavily in work by Hatton and Troutner that looked at a range of sexualization. There were other things that were coded in this project. I don't have time to show you here, but we'll talk about sexualized function, makeup, nudity, clothing, pose, and text. As you can see, the sexualized clothing, still acceptable, but a little bit low. A little bit low for sexualized pose. I'm actually a little bit worried about that one. 6.1 is not where I wanted that alpha to be, but others are pretty good. Sexualization of costume had to do with, of the function had to do with what the person was doing in that costume. Were they a model, a decorative object, an unspecified kind of glamour idea, a Hollywood star, that kind of thing. And we felt that sexualization function would be higher for female models rather than male models. And basically, all of our hypotheses about sexualization would be that however you measured sexualization, it was going to be more frequent for female models compared to male models. And that is in fact what we found. So here is the kind of sexualized costume function. Again, these are costumes like schoolgirl, model, pimp, a variety of other sexualized functions, and those are the rest of the costumes, animals and vampires and witches and those things. And what you can see is that most costumes were not sexualized, right? So most of the costumes are not like the ones I showed you at the beginning, right? Most of them are your sort of standard Halloween costumes that are not heavily sexualized. But what's really interesting here is that by a ratio of literally 48:1, if sexualization did occur, it was overwhelmingly found in costumes worn by female models. Men more likely than women to be fully covered, and women much more likely than men to have any range of nudity from partial to extensive. In fact, no male modeled costumes were found in extensive or moderate nudity. categories. Sexualized makeup, mostly men wearing almost minimal or no makeup, mostly women wearing moderate makeup. These last two are actually makeup that had to do with enhancing the costume, so prop or costume makeup, so like face paint for an animal or things like that. And some of it was sexualized and some of it wasn't, so we made those two categories. But women were higher in both of those categories, especially in that sexualized prop or costume makeup category. Sexualized pose, remember again, the reliability for this one is a little bit lower than I would have liked, but consistent pattern of results. Most costumes not found in a sexualized pose. The standard Halloween costume pose is pretty much, full front, facing forward, which is one of those things we didn't quite anticipate. We were using information from advertising where lots more variation in pose of advertising for other products is much more common. But still, when there was some sexualization in pose, it was much more likely to be in female costumes compared to male. Sexualized clothing, again, most of it not sexualized, but if it appeared sexualized, it was female. And same for sexualized text. I'm going to ask you to take my word for it, which is a terrible thing for a scientist to say to a group of colleagues, right? That's ridiculous. But I'm worried that other people have classes to get to in various things. So I'm going to ask you to take my word for it that our coding framework for gender stereotypes was similarly rigorous. The alphas are actually better in most cases, and I'm going to explain some of this as we go along. We were very interested in this idea of mixed stereotypes, right? So this idea of taking male stereotyped ideas and sort of pasting them onto traditional female stereotypes. She kicks butt in a sequined corset. So aggressive, even violent, but as long as you're beautiful. Be the hottest, right? The hottie, sexualized hottie, superhero around when you wear this women's Wonder Lady costume. I believe that the phrase Wonder Woman is trademarked, and this is not a trademark costume, so it's Wonder Woman Lady. Yes, okay, moving on. Our hypotheses were that female models would be much more likely to be shown in caregiving, magical, mystical, fairy type functions compared to career or athletic or counter-authority roles like ninjas, and that male models would show more markers of horror or weapons and more status markers. And most of those hypotheses were confirmed. A large number of female models in the male role categories, but very, very few male models in the female role categories. If there was horror, and most of these costumes, there were either none or very standard, some blood dripping down because it was a fire, what you would sort of expect to see in a Halloween costume. But if there was an extreme level of horror, or it was much more likely to be found in costumes modeled by male type people. Same pattern for weapons. Not a whole lot of weapons overall, but when they appeared, more likely to be in male costumes. Status markers was the one hypothesis that was not confirmed. Most costumes did not have a whole lot of status markers overall, but when you look at when they were present by male and female models, approximately equal frequency of status markers for male and female models. And Haley and I have the hypothesis that this is due to the Disney princess phenomenon. And so we're investigating some ideas about achieved status versus ascribed status to get at some of the possible similarities or differences between status that you earn, like a sheriff's badge versus a princess crown. And then finally, last thing, this idea of text, stereotype inconsistency. We were looking for words like strong, powerful, daring, adventurous, loud, messy, to be associated with, consistent with male stereotypes. Things like weak, timid, sassy, beautiful, appearance focused, to be consistent with female stereotypes. And what you can see is that there were a lot of neutral text. Here's the costume, it's cost this much, it has these dimensions, it's made in China. They're all made in China. There were a lot of consistent, right, female consistent in the female model costumes, male consistent in the male model costumes. But this comparison, I think, is really interesting. Some mixed text messages, but 3-ish times more mixed messages in costumes directed at women. So, overall question, how sexualized, how gender stereotyped are Halloween costumes? Overall, not that bad, right? It's out there, but you can avoid it if that's your goal. Not that bad. But when it's there, overwhelmingly focused at women. My graduate school advisor said there is a mark of how cool or hip or valuable something is. It's if men want it for themselves. Men don't appear to want sexualization for themselves, which is an intriguing cultural moment. I don't mean that men don't want to be sexy, right, in their personal lives, but they don't apparently want to appear nude or objectified in ways that women may want or at least agree to participate in. Most costumes similarly not extreme in horror or weapons, but when those appear almost entirely in male costumes. The status markers we've talked about a little bit, and then again these very interesting mixed messages in text. Haley Alaman is my current MAIS student and project lead for the Gender Stereotypes Project. Shayla Prickett, honors thesis student, graduated last year, was the project lead for the sexualization project. Thank you for your patience. We have 4.5 minutes for questions. Ready, go. Come here.
I have a question about the general, a broad question about the general thing. When we're communicating stuff like this, especially specifically women's issues to, say, students when we're teaching, right?
Yeah.
I struggle trying to convey that there's a lot of subconscious or unconscious programming that we get, our brain picks up to students. For example, if I talk about eating disorders and tell them, oh, well, when we see models and all that, and how that works. How helpful do you think it is to involve more of our social cog mechanisms of how we pick up things unconsciously into the conversation? It seems to me like there's a missing gap when we talk about issues like this.
Yeah.
We tell the public, oh, well, when it's out there, it affects us, but we don't tell them how. And I feel like an average person, or I find in my classes, at least my long experience of teaching for a couple of terms, that they struggle knowing how that happens. It's easy to sit there and tell them, well, that affects us, makes us this way or that way, but the how, the social cognitive how. How helpful do you think involved with that?
I think you have to tell people the social cognitive how. This project was not designed to get at the how, but now that I have a better sense of what's out there, I can think about maybe using Halloween costumes to illustrate the how or test the how. Is Halloween costumes a vector for how things get inside the mind? The thing about US students in particular is that we are also trained from birth in really highly valued ideas about personal independence. And we are in sole control of our destiny. Nobody controls us. We are not, we do not respond to outside influence. And so what you're running into, I think, Amir, in this classroom situation is the long training in that idea. And so a very understandable resistance to saying, wait, I'm part of a structure and the structure influences me, I don't see it. And if I don't see it, then it doesn't happen. So as I sometimes say in my psychogender class, you don't see that pneumonia germ either, but it still gets you sick. So having questions about the limitations of what you see and what you don't see, and then depending on the level, like I'm not sure that intro students are ready for the full social cognitive mechanism talk, right? I think you're just gonna have to, plant some seeds in intro, and then we get them again in developmental, and then we get them again in maybe in psychogender or in a stereotyping class, right? And we build up this body of knowledge. I don't think anybody's ready to get the whole story right in any one particular spot. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Well, thank you. Anyone else? Oh, come on! There's like 30 seconds left.
Okay, I have two
totally
questions.
kidding. I'm
I have a
totally kidding.
question.
Okay, got it.
Do you think there are class differences
Yes.
based on what we know about other kinds of clothing, for example?
I do. I really, really do. I didn't look at class in these analyses. At some point, I might think about generating some codes about class. What we did instead of contrasting class was choose sites that had a range of class orientations. So example, I didn't really talk about how we chose those things, but Chasing Fireflies, for example, is aimed at a very exclusive, extremely expensive. The average price of costumes in the Chasing Fireflies catalog is about $50.
I don't know how I got on their list, but I throw it right in the trash.
Several $100, yeah, right, exactly. Catalog choice, get off their mailing list. Whereas Walmart, of course, has got the much cheaper range of options. So you can get really elaborate with Halloween or not. And class affects all choices that people make about where to put their money, and class definitely influences, Chasing Fireflies is aimed at a particular class of people for a reason, because that's the group of people who will pay $50 for a costume, and the rest of us are going to throw it in the trash. How that plays out in terms of some kind of interaction with gender, I don't know, but there is some interesting information that you and I have talked about pressure, especially on women who come from a lower socioeconomic status, to self-sexualize more as a way of trying to move up in social status. And quite often that actually backfires against them in terms of those very harsh social judgments about women who present in a very sexualized fashion. Did that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
Kristen?
Very quick question about age. So have you broken this up by age? So when does this start?
When does what start?
When do all these differences start? Like, so you showed like the toddler costume and then the. So
Yeah.
do you have enough data where you can actually break that down?
So for gender stereotypes, we haven't done that yet, but we have the data where we could look by age. And what I wasn't able to show you in these kind of sexualized questions is that Shayla was actually very interested in that question as well. One of the concerns that was published in the APA report from the Task Force on the Sexualization of Girls was that the sexualization of women was being pushed down toward younger and younger ages. So there was some mixed evidence when we looked at age. Overall, definitely the sexualization was more likely in models that were coded in older age groups. But there were some specific categories, and you'll have to forgive me, I don't remember right now exactly which categories they were, but there were some specific categories where there were no age differences in sexualization, suggesting that sexualization occurred regardless of age of the model involved in that picture, suggesting that we are right to be concerned if we are concerned about this pressure to be sexualized coming at younger ages. So, is your question?
So I wanted to follow up on Amir's question and talking about the how, right?
Yeah.
So this can give you fabulous stimuli to do a test on
Right.
how.
Right.
So have you started making plans to do that sort of thing? I'd love to hear just some ideas in that
Okay,
direction.
well, just very off the cuff. All of us, we're always writing down little ideas in our notebook. But so for example, I would love to give some OSU undergrads this in some kind of way, and generate some judgment ratings, some attractiveness ratings, to sort of see how these kinds of self-presentations might be interpreted. It's also possible to use some of these as comparing, contrasting, priming ideas, right? Is women's academic performance negatively impacted by seeing this picture as opposed to that picture before you give them something, suggesting that, if you engage in wearing a costume like this, you may be taking on some potential consequences, if that maps out. The original data from Fredrickson and her colleagues about objectification theory suggested that wearing a swimsuit while solving a math problem created a decrement in math scores for women compared to those assigned to wear the sweater. This is a lot more elaborate than a swimsuit versus sweater comparison. So, would seeing that as opposed to actually wearing something create that same kind of difference? I think those kind of questions are coming out of my lab in the future.
Yeah, awesome.
Thanks.
I definitely want to see undergrads wearing the two costumes doing math
Mhm.
problems. I definitely want to support that.
Well, the trouble is, getting someone into this costume
I
is
know.
going to take 3 times as long
I know,
as
that's
getting
part
someone
of
into. Also, I am not sure how our IRB D would feel about actually putting people in one of these costumes. Also, I'm not sure that Darth Vader, with the full mask on, can solve a math problem. Like, the vision impairment, I don't know. Well, we'll see. I don't know. You've got to help me
I
with
could
that.
totally sell Zooms of Spool in Psych 202 if I could just anywhere close to this would be good. Much better than those Dr. Leon studies I keep hearing about.
Oh. Okay, anything else? All right, thank you, everybody.